Will everyone please take a seat? We're about to start the program. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Gene DiOrio, Vice President of the Greystone Board, and we welcome you all to our 9/11 Memorial Service. We're going to begin the program with the Girl Scouts, who will present the flags, and then after that we will have the Lukens Band playing the national anthem, followed by a prayer. We'll ask you to stand for the national anthem and remain standing for the invocation. So if the Girl Scouts would come forward with the flags, please, at this time.
Would you please stand in the presentation of the flag? Color Guard, attention. Color Guard, advance. Color Guard, post your colors. Color Guard, honor your colors. Now, will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing for the national anthem. Dismissed.
Thank you to the Color Guard and thank you to the Lukens Band. The line by the dawn's early light I think is appropriate for this beautiful morning that we have. And now Reverend Shaw will be giving the invocation. Bill, if you'd come up, please.
Let's pray. God, we are thankful to acknowledge your presence here this morning. And Lord, as we are in the presence of these relics from the World Trade Center, our minds and our hearts go back over the years. We think of those things that you've caused to rise and to fall over those years. We think of people. We think of nations. We think of markets and economies. All of these things, Lord, at times we see rising and falling, and we wonder, are the foundations of the very world shaking at times? And it reminds us of that day on September 11th. So, Lord, would you forgive us when we have not acknowledged you, when we have turned our hearts to things that are not of you. And, Lord, we think of the people who wandered in the desert long ago, in a time when their leader was away. They took their precious things, they melted them down, and they created an idol that they worshipped instead of you. So, Lord, we ask that you would forgive us where we have forgotten your first commands to have no other God but you and to refrain from the worship of idols. Forgive us, God. And we just pray as a people in our own hearts in this community, that you would help us to be a people that speaks the truth in love. And out of that, you would unite us to build on the foundation of this community something that is greater, something that is better, but that's something that never forgets as well. So as we look back, we think of the future, and we ask, Lord, that you would build into the foundation of this community in our hearts and in the people and in all the institutions a spirit of truth and a spirit of reconciliation. And we ask all this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Shaw, for your very beautiful invocation. It's now my pleasure to introduce the president of the Greystone Society, my colleague, Scott Huston. Scott?
Everybody can have a seat. That'd be great. And, I want to welcome everybody to Coatesville, the City Gateway Park, and the Lukens National Historic District on September 11th. It's it's interesting being in the world of history, and not all battles were won. And I think these are tough days when we have to remember the tragic loss and the price of freedom. But I think it's a special day to remember, not only what happened, but as well the good things that came out of it. So before I do, I just want to, let everybody know what we're going to be doing here today. I want to thank the Girl Scouts for walking in the colors, and Bill Shaw for the invocation. The Lukens Band will be playing, and members from the Coatesville area senior high school will be here as well, singing. And we want to ring the bell during 10 moments. They're in the program of the flights taking off, 4 flights taking off and 4 flights crashing, being hijacked and crashed, and then the 2 buildings coming down. And this is really a day to think about 9/11. It's an emotional day for everybody. But think about the people going to the airplanes about this time and getting ready for their flights. To go on their destinations. So it's important to remember the victims as well. That's what we're here for, to remember the day that 2,900 people died in the towers and on the planes and in the Pentagon and in Pennsylvania. So right now in New York and Somerset and D.C., memorials are taking place to commemorate the victims and the people that lost their lives in the towers that went to work on a daily basis. Gene and I have gotten the honor to meet a lot of the Port Authority members and talk to them and get to know them and their stories personally. And so this is a touching day for us all. I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep it together. But, to see the trees here and to be able to connect to them, I think that's what this is really all about, for everybody to, take in the history in their own personal way. And, to bring the trees home was an important project for us all. So it means a lot. And let's see. The victims, of course, were went to work, but we are really here to thank our first responders and the people that put their lives on the line for us every day. I know that the city had a fire the other night, and 7 members were injured. 7 firefighters were injured. So, I really, the ongoing legacy of 9/11 is manifest in a number of different ways. But the living, breathing embodiment of the volunteerism and putting your duty on the line is embodied in our first responders. So today, I want you all to thank them. I want to thank them now, and we'll, really appreciate what they do for us, as far as protecting our citizens. And I think as well, like today's September 11th and the Battle of Brandywine, and is the Minuteman dead? And, I think that in, a modern age, I think that the Minuteman has evolved into, the firefighter, that first line response, that civilian corps that protects our communities on the home front. So it's also important to remember the legacy of what it means to be a civilized society and how to, protect each other and look after each other. I think that's the real legacy that, that I remember as well with 9/11 is the coming together afterwards, the volunteer spirit of the people who went down to Ground Zero and worked on the pier and serviced the people who were looking for family members and the triage. There weren't that many. It was amazing how many the quantity of blood that was donated, but unfortunately that wasn't really needed. But you have this outpouring of community and coming together and breaking down some of those barriers about neighborhoods and where you're from. We were one country, and it was a traumatic time. And I think that going through some of that pressure, you have a real watershed moment in time. And I think that's really the spirit of today, is to remember the community effort and coming together, to pick yourself up and keep going. And tomorrow's another day. And that I think as well is a great legacy for New York and our country and Pentagon and Pennsylvania. So I want to welcome you all today. Enjoy the time you have here with each other, with the firefighters, with the pieces that represent the World Trade Center, and really connect with them in your own way. Again, we will be ringing the bell 10 times. There will be at 10 different moments. The Girl Scouts and a couple other members will do that for us. So we will observe a moment of silence, then I think we'll have music, and we'll also have some other speakers here today. But really just I appreciate you coming and being a part of this, and I think we just should remember the 2,980-some people who passed away on this day. So thank you very much. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Scott, for your remembrances and your great feeling. As Scott indicated, he and I had a lot of contacts with the Port Authority officials. We had several trips to the hangar where these relics, the trees and many other things were preserved. And I can tell you, I don't think the emotion of it ever wore off. You never could become blasé. Every time we went there, I think we understood and felt it more deeply. We have... in a few minutes, we're going to ring the bell for the first time. And let's see. The first one will be 59, which, as Scott indicated, we're going to be commemorating the times when the planes took off, when they crashed, and when the buildings crashed. And I believe our first bell ringing will be at 7:59, when the American Airlines flight departed from Boston. And we are not quite to that time. Scott, you should have spoken a little longer. Anyway, let's see. While we are waiting, why don't we divert for a moment and have the band play their first number? Would that be okay? We have a couple minutes after 59.
Here we go. Start beginning. One before D.
Thank you very much. While we have a few minutes before the first bell ringing, I have just 10 of, and it will be 59. I'll tell you a bit of the history. We learned a number of years ago that the Port Authority had kept some of the trees along with other relics with the idea of eventually using them for museum and memorial purposes. And we were very interested. We made contacts with the Port Authority. Scott and I and a team went over there in the summer, I think it was '06, and met with the Port Authority. And happily, they were very interested in our proposal of acquiring these. The connection, of course, is that the steel for these were made here in Coatesville. And they were very sympathetic to our cause. So we kept working with them. Initially, things were tied up in lawsuits, but by last year, in '09, those had been largely resolved, and we were able to proceed. And of course, a major concern was how were we going to get them down here? And of course, our next step was to negotiate with trucking firms to get it underway. Happily, that was resolved, and many of you were here, I'm sure, in mid-April when we brought the trees back to Coatesville with 28 trucks along here, a major procession. So happily we have them, and we're enormously grateful to the Port Authority. You may wonder, we've been asked, well, what has happened to the rest of the material? The Port Authority saved 18 of the trees. Now, we made steel here for 152 of them. There were 19 on each side of the buildings, and on all four sides in the two buildings. Most of them were scrapped when the buildings collapsed, and New York City was anxious to clear the rubble. But happily they saved 18, put them in the hangar, and we got 10 of them. 3 are going to New York. In fact, just this week, some of those are being returned to Ground Zero. 1 has gone to the Navy SEALs. Another is going to the Department of Homeland Security. But we feel that we were very fortunate and that we got this many. Scott and I spent the day in New York the day that they were loading, and we left New York quite late. And as we were crossing the Verrazzano Bridge, I said, Scott, did you ever think we'd pull this off? But with the help of a great many people and the grace of God, we were able to bring these things back to Coatesville. So we have just a few minutes before the first bell ringing, so if we can just have a pause. And at 7:59, we will commemorate the first takeoff. We have about 6 minutes yet. We are extremely fortunate to have this beautiful day, and of course, historically, it was exactly this sort of day, a clear, calm day in '01 when the crash occurred. The emotional attachment to these is very heavy, and of course, as we have been trying to do, we feel this is the first step. As many of you know, the Greystone Society is developing a museum of the steel industry, and these pieces that you see here, 2 of the trees, will be a very, very important part of that steel museum when we finally get it constructed. We're commemorating many things, as Scott indicated, the victims of 9/11, but we're also saluting our steel workers here who over many generations made this company, this plant, what it is. And we had the technical prowess to produce the steel as required. And we also like to see these things as a symbol of the future, that they will be intrinsic part of the Steel Museum that we hope to develop, and certainly a part of Coatesville's redevelopment. So we have a lot of things at stake here. We'll wait just a couple minutes, and then we'll do the first bell ringing. 7:59. Where is the bell? On this truck? Okay. Okay, good. Our Girl Scout groups are going to do the honor of ringing the bells, and they will announce a little prayer. And we'll have just a moment of silence when that occurs. As we planned this event, we felt that ringing the bells at this appropriate times would be appropriate to incorporate into the ceremony this morning.
Well, before we before we begin with the bell service, there's free refreshments over here. We also have the displays up at the tree on South First Avenue, where you can write down your memories, commemorations, well wishes on that and participate in that way. They will be digitally captured and put on our website and incorporated into the memorial process, so please feel free to do that. There are exhibits on the Luke and steel and the construction of the buildings, and then as well I think the registration table, make sure you sign in for future events and things like that. But I think as well, just a moment of pause before the bells. I think that 7:59, the planes are loading, and I think as well, this is it's an interesting time. You see a lot of children here, and it was 9 years ago, and next year will mark the 10th anniversary. But at a certain point in time, we'll forget, won't we? And we will grow old of this. No, I don't think so. I think it's important for us to pass that on, and it's great to see so many young people here today. So I just wanted to let you know again. There's food here. Our keynote speaker will be here at 9 o'clock. For the keynote, and Lou Angeli, he was a first responder on the pile and worked there for a number of days, and his story is well documented, and he will be here today. We also we'll have a musical feature. Dr. Barnes will be singing between 9:30 and 10. We want to thank as well other people who served on the pile who are here today. James Thompson and Dan O'Deans, I know, is somewhere here today. Some of the people who worked at Ground Zero are here today. Maybe you could just take a moment to recognize some of the people who volunteered on that. I know, James, you're here. Yeah, so maybe you could just stand and be recognized at this time. And I think again that volunteer spirit of going down to participate and help out fellow Americans needs to be recognized. And I know you were here as well. Some of you were here for the 14th when we brought the trees in. But I think about 10 Chester County people went down to the pile. We have. People have come forward with relatives who, I don't think anybody from Chester County was in the World Trade Towers. I know 130 Pennsylvanians passed away in the World Trade Center 9/11 incident. So we want to recognize the people who went to the pile, as well as, I know that some of us know some people who passed away. I know they're dedicating the statue of the co-pilot at West Chester University today, later on tonight, and they'll be ringing the bell at September 11th at the Brandywine Battlefield as well. So I wanted to take the moment to recognize some of the Ground Zero people. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Scott. First bell ringing. Can we have a moment of silence?
The time is now 7:59. American Airlines Flight 11, Boston to Los Angeles, takes off from Logan Airport with 76 passengers, 11 crew members, and 5 hijackers on board. Please observe a moment of silence.
Very good. Now I will introduce our first speaker, Mr. Ed Simpson, who is president of Coatesville City Council. Ed, please. Would you like to use that microphone? Over there, please.
Scott had touched on a couple things about we'll never forget, or will we forget. For me, I don't think anybody that that is old enough to remember, to watch the horror and devastation will ever forget. I'm a little nervous up here today. It's the incident that happened 9 years ago triggers a lot of emotion for me, because one of the things that I remember more than anything, well, I'm getting off track now, but is just the outpouring of support and the country coming together. But I put a few things together. So first of all, I'm honored and privileged to stand up here today, because September 11th, 2001 is a day that will forever be remembered and never be forgotten. It is a day that some people will say started a holy war between the United States and the Muslim community. Some people will say it was the worst day in American history, comparable to the bombing of Pearl Harbor. For me, I will never forget the horror and devastation that was unfolding right before my eyes on live TV, sitting down at the former Nick's restaurant in Coatesville, Nick Agnostopoulos, with our now current chief, Julius Canal. And I'll never forget the emotion that overcame me and the tears that ran down my face, thinking about all the families that will forever be ruined by the cowardly acts done by a group of terrorists that hate us for just being Americans. They didn't know or understand our culture, our way of living. All they knew about us is what they were told by a small group of cowardly people who didn't have the courage or guts to do it themselves. What they didn't count on is the wave of patriotism that gripped this nation and brought us back together as a country, the likes of which had not been seen since World War II. This is what I remember the most. It is the outpouring of American patriotism that built this wonderful country over the last 200 plus years. We're going through some tough times as a nation, as well as a community. But the one thing we can all count on is that when we are put to the test, this country will band together and come out fighting to continue to make the United States of America the best country in the world. God bless America. Thank you.
Thank you, President Simpson. Now my pleasure to introduce the second speaker, Mr. Ted Reed, who is the city manager, and I'm pleased to say a member of the Greystone Society's Board of Directors. Ted, if you will, please.
For so long, this flag has been a symbol. It has been a symbol of the fighting, the controversies, the efforts of our early country to become free. This flag symbolizes across the world what it is to be a free nation. And for each and every one of us, we probably like the flag, like the stars, and we saluted it in school and in various events. But on September 11, 2001, this flag took on a new meaning. Because for each and every one of us, who I am sure can remember exactly where you were when you first heard of the crash into the towers, and all of the efforts of men and women and the first responders to try to save the lives of those who were affected. And perhaps it was a few months later that it really dawned on us that this flag really does symbolize freedom. And for the first time in our lives, each of you sitting here or standing here today, we finally realized that there were those who wanted to take this freedom from us. And this flag became more of a symbol than perhaps anything else in our lives could be. A symbol of freedom. And the lives that were lost in defense of freedom. Not only during all of the wars and all of the conflicts and the revolutions, but on September 11. Those people, not knowing what was going to happen when they got up that day, and this very minute 9 years ago, had no concept that they would not be alive in just a few hours. They were going about their jobs in this free country. And today, I think this celebration symbolizes not only the loss of those lives and our mourning for those who died in those buildings on the ground in Pennsylvania, but those who died trying to save others, the first responders. They were all fighting for freedom. And because of everything that has gone on over the last few hundred years of this nation, and particularly today, we memorialize September 11, 2001, but we stand up to be recognized today and every day of our lives that this flag means something to us. It means freedom. And you and I are free. But it comes with a price. Our involvement in maintaining that freedom. We mourn the loss of so many, but we praise the efforts of so many more to serve our country, our nation, our community, so that all of us can remain free. God bless this flag. God bless this community, and God bless the so many responders and people who lost their lives but continue today to still serve. And God bless America. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted, for your very appropriate words. We are going to have another second bell ringing at 8:14, and we have a few minutes before that. We will be commemorating with a second bell when United Airlines flight number 175 departed from Boston. I think what Ted said, that so many people had no idea what was going to happen. A normal work day in the financial district of New York in these very large office buildings. And suddenly, within a few hours, they were gone. We have had several people remark to us that it was something like Pearl Harbor. Again, the United States, which considered itself invulnerable, was attacked at Pearl Harbor. But this was even harder, I think, because it was right in the heart of the financial district of our largest city. These towers, which were symbols of American wealth and power and influence, in a few hours they were just heaping rubble. It was really mind-boggling. Scott and I, with our trips to New York and our acquaintance with the Port Authority, saw a lot of pictures and were just emotionally with what you had there. And a sidelight, when we hired a trucking firm to bring the trees down here to Coatesville, the firm had no problem finding drivers. numerous drivers. They were very happy to do it. They decked their trucks with flags and banners. And Scott and I spent the day in New York watching the trees being loaded. And then in the afternoon, we went down to the staging area and talked to many of the drivers. And I mean, these are very outgoing, experienced people, and they were emotional too. And I think it affected both of us to do that. We're going to just take a break for a minute while we're waiting for the next bell, which will be 8:14. So just relax. And as Scott indicated, we do have coffee going. So we'll wait a minute.
a collector, so he has a lot of Coatesville stuff. And he asked me to bring that up. Because he didn't know, like, he's not a rent, and there's papers in it.
Yeah, I saw that.
So, if you have it, just so that you know, just like you want to cover it. But if you don't, then it's yours. Yeah. So just, if you have it, submit it. If you don't have it,
Okay.
if you have one,
Yeah.
you'd like to have it back. That's not
Sure.
like
It's only the only copy.
yeah, that's okay. You got it, so have it. This is what we want to have it.
Okay. My pleasure. Yeah. Thanks again.
The time is now 8:14. United Airlines Flight 175, Boston to Los Angeles, takes off from Logan Airport with 51 passengers, 9 crew members, and 5 hijackers on board. Please observe a moment of silence.
Thank you. We will now have another musical selection by the Lukens Band.
Thank
Now we have another few moments of pause until the next bell ringing at 8. Yes, we have a few minutes yet. In the meantime, let me tell you a bit more about what we've found in New York. In addition to the trees, there were numerous other relics: subway cars, police cars, fire trucks. Give the credit to the Port Authority. They did save many, many things, which will eventually, of course, go into the museum. Two things that were not there the first time we went, but were brought back later. The government had them for testing, but there were two enormous pieces of twisted steel which were identified as having been the steel from the point of impact where the plane actually hit. I'm sure they will be major items in the New York Museum when it is eventually constructed. Also, the Port Authority is making smaller pieces of steel available for various memorials around the country, and numerous fire companies that want them. So that sort of thing is happening too. We learned recently that a tree that didn't go to the Port Authority's collection made its way to California and is now in a fire department in Los Angeles training center. So Scott and I found it on the web, and we're interested to see that there is a tree that the Port Authority really, well, they didn't release it, the city of New York did. We are going to have the next one. Is he here? Is Rafferty? I see Jim. You'll have to go first, yeah, right. Right after the bell, yes. Our next bell ringing will be at 8:20 as we commemorate flight number 77, American Airlines, which departed for Washington. So we have just a few minutes. We'll do that. One comment that we heard when we brought the trees back was that this steel was made in Coatesville, lived in New York, and died in New York, and now is back here. But we don't see it as being dead and buried in Coatesville because we have great plans for these pieces eventually as prominent part of our museum, and they should stand as symbols of many things, and of course, as Ted Reed indicated, symbols of the resilience of the United States. So we'll just rest a moment until the next bell ringing, which will be just a few minutes.
The time is now 8:20. American Airlines Flight 77, Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles, takes off from Washington Dulles International Airport with 53 passengers, 6 crew members, and 5 hijackers on board. Please observe a moment of silence.
Thank you. And now the band will give us a bit more music, please. Thank you to the band. We couldn't do our many ceremonies here without the Lukens Band, which is very much part of the history and tradition of this community and the company, and I think just about to celebrate their own 100th anniversary. Our next speaker I'm very happy to introduce is Senator John Rafferty, who represents this district in the Pennsylvania Senate. Senator?
Thank you, Gene. Congratulations to the Lukens family, to Skip and to Scott, and to Gene for coordinating today's event. Today is a solemn day and a sober day for all of us in the United States of America. This is the second event I've been to this morning for 9/11, and as soon as I'm done here, I'm heading to another one. And I'm pleased that America's taking the time on 9/11 to remember what happened 9 years ago. It's a time for remembrance and reflection, yet at the same time, it's for us to show our gratitude to the men and women who are the first responders today, our police officers, our firefighters, and our EMTs, many of whom are with us today, mindful that day in and day out, they can be called to a scene and have the same type of occurrence, the same type of situation that they must face. Driving down today to Coatesville from the Norristown Trooper area, I was listening to KYW, and they are replaying the events of 9/11 on KYW News Radio today. And just before I got here, they were saying that the time was when the two jets had taken off from Boston and that they had lost contact with the two jets shortly after takeoff. And then hearing the words about the plane taking off from Washington, D.C. made me think about where I was that day and what I was doing that day on 9/11. It's a day that will be etched in our memories and have great sorrow in our hearts, but because we know 3,000 innocent people lost their lives that day. Not only those in the two towers and in the Pentagon, but those on the flight that crashed into southwestern Pennsylvania, and the men and women doing their jobs as police officers, as firefighters, as EMTs, as priests and ministers going in to aid and comfort those who have been injured, lost their lives doing God's work. We are a fortunate country. We are a resilient country. What Luke and Steele has done in bringing the trees here is mindful to us of not only the events of that day and the great horror inflicted on this country, but let them stand as a testimonial to the world and to all of us of the might and the industriousness of the United States of America, that we can and we have stood tall in time of adversity, pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps, taken on our foes, and made ourselves the prominent nation in this world. We have done it in World War II. We'll do it again. The difference is, in past wars, we knew an enemy by the uniform they wore. We don't have that today. We have to be constantly vigilant. But the United States of America, with its workforce that has made this country great and will continue to keep it number one, with the military that we have, second to none in this world, and to the men and women of our communities who serve us in the police departments, the fire companies, EMTs, and all of us pulling together, will make sure that they know overseas, those who want to harm us, that we're not going to let it happen in the United States of America. We're going to stand tall. We're going to show them what our history has proven and show them we're not afraid to kick them and to keep them down. It's important for us never to lose our passion and our resilience for keeping this country great, for watching out for one another and protecting one another. I don't want to hear about political kindness. We're at war, and we have to be mindful of that. Those trees serve us as that reminder. Those trees serve to keep us vigilant, and those trees serve as a memorial for those men and women who were innocently killed on 9/11 9 years ago. May all their souls rest with the Almighty in His care. May the men and women serving us in the armed forces be protected by the Almighty and kept in His care as they continue to fight for us and for our freedoms. And for the police officers, firefighters, and EMTs, may God keep them all in His care. To each and every one of you, thank you very much for taking the time this morning to be here with the Lukens family and this great city of Coatesville to honor 9/11 and those who have paid the price. And remember, this is the day that we show the world that we are the United States of America. We have been and we still are number one. God bless you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Rafferty, for those inspiring words and for being with us here today. We are honored with your presence. It is now my honor and pleasure also to introduce our next speaker, Congressman Gerlach. We are in his district. Jim has been very supportive of the efforts that we've been making with this museum project, and it's especially a pleasure to welcome here.
Thank you. Thank you, Gene. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here this morning and to be part of this very solemn ceremony. I'm honored to pay tribute to those whose lives were forever changed on 9/11 and to remember how the American spirit triumphed during an unimaginable tragedy. Although 9 years have passed, our memories of 9/11 remain vivid. We can still recall with great detail exactly where we were, what we were doing, and the rush of emotions we felt as we watched the most deadly act of terrorism on American soil unfold. And we can look at pride with how the first responders, our police, our fire, EMTs, responded to that call and how they served their fellow countrymen. The passage of time has not erased the scars, but it has provided us all, I think, with some additional perspective. Looking back, 19 Islamic jihadists, filled with rage and hatred, attacked what they believed were the symbols of America's selfishness. But America simultaneously showed the world just how unselfish we are. Just one example of the selfless sacrifice made by ordinary citizens occurred in a field a little more than 160 miles from here, where we are today. Those brave passengers aboard United Flight 93 had every right to stay in their seats and pray quietly for a miracle, But knowing the two planes had already slammed into the World Trade Center towers and another had plunged into the Pentagon, these courageous souls knew doing nothing was not the right thing to do. They, like so many Americans, knew that while we enjoy incredible individual rights, we also bear an equally important responsibility of protecting the greater good. So aboard Flight 93, several of the 33 passengers prayed together one last time and rushed the cockpit after 4 terrorist hijackers seized control of the plane. Their selfless and spontaneous sacrifice ended in that field in Somerset County. The examples set by the heroes of Flight 93 and others who acted bravely that morning must be recognized, must be saluted, and they must endure. You see, the exemplary examples of so many on the morning of September 11th and in the weeks and months that followed remind us that being an American is not just about constantly discussing and asserting our constitutionally protected rights in every situation that faces us. It's also recognizing the importance of responsible citizen action. In other words, the rights of a free and self-governing people are inseparably connected to their exercise of those rights in a responsible manner. Just consider for a moment how much more horrific 9/11 would have been if many Americans did not think beyond themselves and ignored their responsibilities to their fellow citizens. Think if the first responders did not respond the way they did. Flight 93 would have certainly ended in a different way, with perhaps a fiery crash into the Capitol building or the White House in Washington, D.C. Thousands of office workers descending the smoke-filled stairways of the Twin Towers would have fended for themselves rather than carrying injured and disabled colleagues down dozens of flights of stairs to safety. Military and civilian personnel would have stood outside the smoldering Pentagon instead of running back inside to rescue co-workers. That same connection between rights and responsibilities raises its head every day as we consider what one's rights are versus what the right thing to do is. And we see that play out in controversies even today, such as the mosque at Ground Zero, the proposed burning of a Quran in Florida, or even here locally, using the former Pennhurst State Mental Hospital for a Halloween fright amusement. While there is certainly not a hard and fast rule that can uniformly be applied in every situation in trying to resolve the balance between rights and responsibilities, we likewise know it when we see it, in that selfish sacrifice and service that so many fellow Americans have given and continue to give, as exemplified by those in uniform around us here this morning that give us service every day to protect life and property. And so it's important that we acknowledge all of the exemplary citizens that we saw then and we continue to see around us today. While the events of this historic day will and should never fade from our nation's memory, I also want to take a pause to thank Greystone Society and the Lukens Foundation for undertaking a very ambitious project to ensure that future generations will remember Coatesville's connection to 9/11. As many of you know, the steel industry has been part of the fabric of Coatesville for 200 years. The former Lukens steel plant helped sustain this community and fueled America's growth and prosperity. In the late 60s, the dedicated employees at Lukens, all with a work ethic as strong as the steel they forged, manufactured the steel tree columns, one over here, used to support the lobby of the Trade Center building. More than 3 decades later, the steel workers of this city continue to beam with pride while telling their children and grandchildren how their work formed the foundation of one of the most recognizable landmarks in the world. When the Twin Towers collapsed, most of the 500 tons of Lukens steel in the lobby was still standing. It was an amazing testament to the exceptional quality of the steel and the character of those who manufactured it. 10 of the steel tree columns returned to Coatesville on the back of flatbed trucks in April was an amazing journey. The steel trees will hopefully be part of a National Iron and Steel Heritage Museum plan for this historic district. This bittersweet homecoming for the steel trees is the result of a great vision and hard work on the part of Greystone and the foundation, and others in Coatesville dedicated to making this museum a reality. While the steel will always serve as a somber reminder of one of the darkest days in our country's history, it's also a shining example of Coatesville's storied history of steel production and holds great potential for a brighter future for the city. So I want to thank you for putting this very important tribute together, this very important ceremony to recognize those that we've lost, to recognize those that have served, and to recognize that by continuing to work together, by being Americans, we will continue to thrive and continue to prosper and continue to move forward as the great nation we are. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Congressman Gerlach, for your inspiring words and for your presence with us today. We have now going to have, in just a few moments, the next bell ringing, which will commemorate Flight 93, which departed from the Newark airport. And our Girl Scouts will be ringing that bell in just a moment. As Jim indicated, everyone has memories of this. Again, going back to Scott and I's experiences in New York, I remember the official that we dealt with at the airport told me that he was in one of the buildings. Facing the other way, he didn't see the plane crash, but then it did, and he came down 65 flights of steps to get out of the building. I can't think at my age, or even if I was 30 years younger, coming down 65 flights of steps in a few moments. We'll just have a minute, and then we'll have the next bell ringing. I remember being in New York myself in December of '01, and one day I had occasion to be in Grand Central Station, and when you came through the main entrance on 42nd Street, there were a whole series of flats that people had used to put letters, photographs, begging the world, if you've found or seen my husband, my wife, my son, whoever. People for days not at all sure what had happened to their loved ones who were in those buildings. It was an extremely touching thing to see the collection of pictures and notes, and I'm not ashamed to admit it was very emotional. The Port Authority has kept some of that sort of thing, and they will be on display, I'm sure, eventually in the museum. We'll wait just a few minutes here for the next bell ringing. We have been blessed with a perfectly gorgeous day, and many people have remarked that it was exactly the sort of day in which this tragedy did occur in New York. As the wind blew the flag over and Scott picked it up, he said, you should use this and say the flags sometimes come down, but it always comes back up, which it did momentarily. Incidentally, one of the trees was brought back to Ground Zero just this week. I think it was Tuesday. And there were pictures in the news. It was all wrapped and with a flag on it and being placed. I talked to one of the people at the Port Authority a couple days ago who said that, yes, the steel workers were there actually crawling inside to make connections. These will be standing upright in the museum in New York, which will be built around them. And it must have been quite a project, but they brought them back from the hangar on Long Island in the wee hours of the morning, and I believe they brought one and possibly two. So they are making progress in New York for the revitalization of that entire area. And of course, the Freedom Tower is well underway. It will be 1,776 feet high, I believe. We do want to express our appreciation to the school children who are here. I think we're about to have a bell ringing.
Time is now 8:42. United Airlines Flight 993 New Jersey to San Francisco takes off from Newark International Airport with 33 passengers, 7 crew members, and 4 hijackers on board. Please observe a moment of silence.
Thank you. Now we will have another musical selection by the Lukens Band.
Thank
Thank you for that very appropriate selection. Now we will have another bell ringing at 8:46, commemorating Flight 11, which at that time actually crashed into the North Tower. So in a moment, another bell ringing.
The time is now 8:46. The hijackers crashed American Airlines Flight 11, carrying 85 passengers and crew, into floors 94 to 98 of the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Please observe a moment of silence.
I think that was the most horrific thing, as everyone indicated, wherever you were and you saw the first plane crash, the unbelievable thing, which people first thought it was an accident, remembering that many years ago a plane crashed into the Empire State Building. Our next musical selection will be a group of wonderful students from the Coatesville Area High School, the Redmond, and the Belltones. So if you would, please. Thank you for that lovely and very appropriate selection. We're very happy to have the school group here. Those children are the future of this community, and we're happy to have them join us. It is now my pleasure to introduce our county commissioners, all three of whom are here this morning. If you would come up to the stage. I see Commissioner Achel and Guzon and Commissioner Farrell. Happy to welcome you here.
Happy to be here.
Oh, delighted.
Who's first? Want me first? I guess I am. We are. Good morning. I am humbled and honored to be a part of Coatesville today. To Jean DiOrio and to the Lukens family, represented here by the Hustons, Skip, Scott, and Chip, who are so much a part of the fabric of Coatesville and have been part of this community. The Lukens family has been part of this community since there was a community here, so we are delighted to be a part of this. I'd also like to recognize, as a former Girl Scout, the many Girl Scouts and Brownies. It brought a smile to my face on a day that I remember a lot of what was part of my growing up here in the United States. The steel trees shown here represent the very best of Lukens Steel, the oldest steel company in America. These mighty beams stood tall and held up the World Trade Center buildings for decades. It is fitting that we have today's celebration in the town where these beams were formed. The metal is now twisted and torn, but thanks to the efforts of so many people, these trees have come home to be a part of the steel working heritage that is so much a part of Coatesville. This country is great for a lot of reasons. Just look around you, where we are here today. It was coal here in Pennsylvania, iron, steel, the railroad cars, the community, and the faith in God. Today we honor the memory of the men and women who lost their lives on 9/11. We particularly thank the first responders who protect our communities every day. And we also want to remember the generations of steelworkers who made this country and made this city. We are very proud of their work, and Chester County is proud to be a part of everything that is so American and so much a part of what we all believe. Thank you for letting me be a part of this day. I'd like to introduce now my fellow commissioners, and I'll start with Kathy.
Good morning, everyone. I too am humbled and honored to be here today to remember along with you that day 9 years ago. And I think it has been said earlier today, but as I was driving over here this morning, it occurred to me that the sky and the weather is not very much different from what it was that day. I want to also thank the Huston family, the Greystone Society, for working so hard to put this together I think it's important for all of us to remember what happened that day, to honor the heroes, the firefighters, the law enforcement officers, the EMTs, and the everyday citizens who, some of whom engaged in extraordinary acts of heroism. When the steel trees came into Coatesville, we all shared our personal experiences of that day. And in my discussion with the group, we talked about the fact that 4 days from now I will celebrate my 9th wedding anniversary. That was a long 4 days. It was 4 days of us wondering where some family and friends were, like many of you here and many around the world. But when we finally did go through with our ceremony, which we thought was the right and fitting thing to do, we came together as a group of close family and friends who didn't just celebrate our marriage, but celebrated the spirit of that day, celebrated the folks who lost their lives for no other reason than because they went to work that day, like my friend Greg Malone, to celebrate the heroes that I talked about earlier. It's wonderful to see the firefighters and the law enforcement officers here today. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you for what your community did then and what you do every single day. At our reception that day, we started the reception with the national anthem. I'm not sure I've ever been to a wedding where we did that before. But as we sang the national anthem, I was looking around the room, and everybody in the room was crying. We cried for all the people that died that day. We cried tears of pride for the heroes. We cried for the spirit of the American citizens. I'm proud to be here today. I'm proud that the steel trees are a remembrance of that spirit. The will, the determination, and the sacrifices of everyday Americans are part now of the city of Coatesville. And I believe it's a symbol, perhaps, of the spirit, the will, and the determination of the people of the city of Coatesville. I very much appreciate the opportunity to be part of this ceremony today. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Commissioner Terrence Farrell.
Thank you, Commissioner Cazzone and Commissioner Achel. It's my privilege to be here with my colleagues today. We were here in the city of Coatesville yesterday to celebrate a groundbreaking for Habitat for Humanity, which is putting 45 new affordable housing buildings in homes in the city of Coatesville. The commissioners have been here a number of times over the past couple of years to celebrate what is great and wonderful about Coatesville, and we're here today on this remembrance of 9/11 to do that again. My colleagues have talked about the steel trees which have been manufactured here and shipped out in 1969 to form the structural infrastructure for the first 9 floors of the World Trade Towers, and they returned here. We were all here, the 3 commissioners, many of you, for that bittersweet day when we celebrated their return but remembered why they had returned. I'd also like to thank our first responders. Many lost their lives on 9/11, 2001, and they stand in the breach between us and disaster, between us and death sometimes. And just recently, we have to recall that once again they answered the call when the Millview apartments caught fire a couple days ago, and they rushed in when others fled, and 7 were hurt, a couple seriously. So we need to remember and thank all the volunteer first responders. So thank you for the job that you do. Thank you for being there for us again and again. We appreciate it. We realize that you are volunteers. People who come from other states sometimes don't realize that many of the fire companies in Chester County are volunteers. Words really fail us in remembering and recalling those horrific events. On 9/11, I remember coming into work, hearing the first reports of a plane hitting a tower. It was reported that it was a Cessna. It was not.
those events unfolded that day, memorable events that we will never forget, that are there with the memory in my lifetime of the assassination of John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King. But some of those events pale in comparison to what 9/11 has meant to us. So I'm here today to thank the city of Coatesville for all you've done in contributing to the nation. And we are here as commissioners to celebrate what you have done and to say we will continue to stand with you now and into the years to come. Thank you.
Our appreciation to the members of the Chester County Board of Commissioners who were here with us today. And yes, they were all here in April when we brought the trees back from New York. Now, in a moment at 9:02, we will have the next bell ringing, commemorating flight number 175, which crashed into the South Tower in New York. So just a couple of minutes and we'll have another bell ringing.
The time is now 9:03. The hijackers crashed United Airlines Flight 175 carrying 60 passengers and crew into floors 78 to 82 of the South Tower of the World Trade Center. Please observe a moment of silence.
Thank you. And now another musical selection from the Lukens Band.
I want you to start at 9 with the pickup note. When we get down to the part that says a little faster, skip that and go on to the My Stow song. Pick up 9. Okay? Pick up the 9. Put down and skip. All right, 9. Pick up before 9. Yeah.
Thank you. Beautiful as always. Don't know what we'd do without the Lukens Band. As our commissioners indicated, we all have enormous indebtedness to our firefighters, both local and national, who, as they say, go in when others go out. And yes, we had an experience just a couple of nights ago of a major fire here in Coatesville. We have Chief John DeMarco from Upper Euclid with us today, who I believe was in New York as a volunteer, and also Kevin Larkin from the Downingtown Fire Company. And, of course, we are indebted to the members of Coatesville Fire who have done this marvelous thing with Downingtown. Could we have a round of applause for those people? It's now my pleasure to introduce our featured speaker, Mr. Lou Angeli, who I understand is an emergency medical technician, has been in New York, and is an Emmy award-winning filmmaker and associated with the History Channel. Mr. Angeli, where? There he is.
Yeah. I'm actually associated with the Discovery Channel, but that's okay. I've got this stool here because I'm going to be talking for about 2 hours, so just sort of get into it. I'd like to... yeah, do that. I'd like to acknowledge the fact that there's so many important dignitaries here. I'd also like to acknowledge the fact that my brother firefighters here and law enforcement officers. Also with us is firefighter James Madison, who on 9/11 was one of the first responders as a New York firefighter. He now lives here in Chester County. Jim was a member of one of the Haztech units and was one of the first at Ground Zero. He was lucky to escape with his life, and he has wonderful stories to tell as well. We have a lot of children here, and I'm so glad to see that their parents have brought them. And if any of the kids would want to come up and sit up in front here, that would be wonderful, because this is going to be a history lesson as well as acknowledging what took place at Ground Zero. So if you want to come up, kids, that would be great. I may sit down from time to time. I just had back surgery, so... New York World Trade Center complex encompassed about 16 acres and contained 7 buildings, including the towers. It was home to hundreds of international buildings, and the towers were symbols of economic success. For millions, the North and South Towers had become an indelible part of the Manhattan skyline. Their size and significance made them New York's #1 tourist attraction, hosting tens of thousands of visitors each year. On a clear day, you can see downtown Philly, I remember the tour guide telling me. But it was that same fascination that drew so many tourists to New York City from around the world that also made the structures a target for terrorists. The first attack took place, if you recall, on February 26, 1993, when Islamic terrorists planted a powerful bomb inside a rental truck, and with the hope of creating an explosion and collapse that would kill 250,000 people. This is 1993. However, when the device detonated, the parking structure shielded the main towers from the powerful blast. Damage was limited to the 4-story parking structure and leaving the main towers virtually untouched. But what we witnessed 8 years later on a live television was a much different scenario. This time, religious zealots gained control of fuel-laden 757 jets, flying one plane into the North Tower and a second into the South Tower at over 500 miles per hour. It's almost the speed of sound. The fires caused by the massive explosions burned out of control, and As being hundreds of feet above the ground, they were far from the hose lines and ladders of the FDNY. I just can't even imagine what those guys were thinking when they arrived. I guess you got to ask Jim. The attacks on the trade centers 9 years ago to this moment tested the determination of emergency responders and well beyond their experience and imagination. As emergency calls poured into New York City, firefighters, police officers, and emergency personnel, whether they were on duty or off, rushed into Lower Manhattan. Commanding operations at the South Tower was Battalion Chief Ray Downey, who headed the Special Operations Division of FDNY, and I believe he was your boss. Ray was an internationally known fire chief and regarded as one of the nation's leading experts on high-rise fires. So when he phoned me, as he and his aide responded to the World Trade Center, our conversation was very, very short. "Lou, get here quickly," Ray said over the noise of the sirens. "There's going to be a bad day, and we have much to learn from what's going to take place." I could tell by his voice that it was going to be a very tough day for the FDNY. As I was assembling my equipment, both my firefighting and camera equipment, I'd glance at the TV from time to time. Flames were quickly spreading from floor to floor, and I ran the likely scenarios through my mind. The elevators were probably shut down. Occupants below the fire were escaping through the stairwells down. Passing them going up would be firefighters carrying hundreds of pounds of equipment. And I left my house realizing the obvious, and that would be the North Tower would soon become a towering inferno. Racing up the New Jersey Turnpike, I noticed that traffic was becoming much lighter as I got further north. I glanced at my fuel gauge, and it was reading E, so I made a quick stop. And I noticed a group of truckers who had gathered around a small 12-inch black and white TV monitor, and one of them motioned to me to come over. He looked at me and he said, "Bad day for you guys." And so I said, "Why is that?" And he pointed to the screen. The distant cameras revealed that both towers were ablaze with a heavy loom of smoke going into the Manhattan skyline. One of the guys said, "Imagine those poor souls who are trapped above the fire." I knew that very few of those people would be viable, which is a term we use in fire and EMS, meaning alive. And so I continued to watch the TV, and I was just totally dumbfounded. And next, I heard a trucker say, "Oh my God, they're jumping." And I fought off becoming ill, quickly returned to my truck, and then continued traveling to Manhattan. We'll jump to ground zero. I wasn't there yet. For firefighters, police officers, and medics, the sole focus at that time was to get into the Twin Towers and rescue thousands of people who remained inside. We were afraid of how many people were going to perish on that day, firefighter Joe Marabito later told me. As we worked, it was a tough thought, and it was hard to bear. John continued to describe the scene. There were many hundreds of people coming down the stairs. Many were crying, some of them were burned, others were bleeding from debris that had hit them. As Morabito and other first responders evacuated the building occupants and climbed the stairwells to fight the blazes, the intense heat was rapidly weakening and distorting the massive steel structures. My mind was racing, and I anticipated all the horrible scenarios facing my friend Ray Downey and other fire commanders. Then I recalled a controversial 1998 congressional hearing during which another FDNY chief, Vincent Dunn, testified that a collapse would be the likely result of another bombing at the World Trade Center. I desperately hoped that Vince was wrong, but he was one of the most experienced firefighters in the country, In fact, his area of expertise was building collapse. And it wasn't long before Vince's predictions would prove to be correct. In less than 2 hours, it was all over. Shortly after the Twin Towers had collapsed, casualty estimates were in the tens of thousands, with many of New York's most seasoned firefighting personnel missing. Surviving firefighters began to break into teams to begin the search and rescue operation. There was death and madness everywhere in the smoke, said Lieutenant Bill Keegan of the Port Authority Police Department. The task was enormous, and it was so difficult to maneuver the pile. We had no idea how to get to those people who were trapped. More than one surviving rescuer described the scene as a nuclear winter. There was ash everywhere. It was impossible to see or breathe, and there was total silence, and eerie, eerie silence. With the World Trade Center gone, all that remained was a 16-acre swath of destruction, which reporter Dan Rather quickly dubbed as Ground Zero. These next words I borrow from the film we produced a few years ago called Answering the Call. It was read by Kathleen Turner. At the center of Ground Zero is the pile. Here, more than 1.5 million tons of broken steel beams, twisted rebar, pulverized concrete, and shattered glass stand up to 7 stories high. It was all gray there, and smoke was pouring out, remembers firefighter Morabito. It looked like a living, breathing entity, and it certainly was. For rescues like John Morabito, the battlefield's front lines were redrawn. The new mission was to quickly save as many people as possible who were trapped or buried alive. And amid all of the chaos, officials feared there was another disaster brewing, more terror attacks on Lower Manhattan. At this point, I'm going to share with you my personal experiences at Ground Zero. And I'm going to read from my diary, which really wasn't a diary. They were a series of emails that I sent my son Drew, who was 10 years old at the time. And actually, Drew's 19 now, and he probably knows the contents much better than I do. So I'll give it a try. It was mid-afternoon when I arrived at Midtown Manhattan. It was just 6 hours after the disastrous events of the morning. Thousands of emergency responders from around the East Coast converged on Midtown Manhattan. Burning furiously, Building 7 posed the major hazard to the rescue operation. So incoming emergency personnel and volunteers were kept back, staged along West River Parkway at Chelsea Piers. They've pulled us out. We've got to wait till Building 7 comes down, a Westchester County, New York volunteer told me. The FDNY is staged further downtown, he said, shaking his head, and I can't imagine how they're taking this. As we spoke, a distant rumble and a cloud of smoke signaled that the Building 7 had indeed pancaked onto Vesey Street, and that was our cue to get to work. The NYPD opened the barriers, limiting access which had limited access at 17th Street, and hundreds of us began the 2-mile trek down to the disaster zone. For me, it started out as a long hike, especially with my fire and camera equipment, but as firefighters are a brotherhood, every 100 feet or so, I felt another backpack or a tripod lifted off my shoulders, carried now by a firefighter from who knows where. As we got closer to the Trade Center complex, surrounding buildings were windowless and dark and had taken on human traits. They seemed like looming giants, badly injured, yet not defeated. Every surface was covered with a choking dust that colored the entire landscape, gray and lifeless. The streets of Lower Manhattan were cluttered with thousands of shredded sheets of paper. All around, cars, trucks, emergency vehicles looked as if they had been bombed. The familiar 24-hour fruit stands and bagel stands were abandoned. The apples and bananas stood undisturbed in rows, coated with a layer of pulverized concrete a half-inch thick. Still 10 blocks from Ground Zero, we couldn't see it, but we could certainly smell it. A musty odor, much like that of a damp cellar or attic. We trudged through the Tribeca district, which is just north of the World Trade Center complex. And there the ash-filled streets were dark and gave us a sense that we were entering into the bowels of a ghastly underworld. The entire scene was from some other planet, and it was only the company of other firefighters and rescuers that convinced me that I was still on planet Earth. And as we continued south toward the giant cloud, we became increasingly disoriented. We kept looking around, all of us hoping to find someone, anyone, who was willing to admit they were in charge. Finally, we came upon an FDNY battalion commander dressed in blue jeans, a white shirt, and a black tie. Battalion chiefs in New York always wear a white shirt and black tie. As he approached our group, I noticed that his thin face showed deep wrinkles. His eyes were blue but very glazed over. And he dispensed with the introductions and immediately barked out instructions. Listen up, everyone. The air here is very, very bad. And he handed us each a surgical mask. Take one of these, wear it. And after that, he just sort of scanned the group to check us out, size up our capabilities, and he said, let's go. We stepped off at a rapid pace. The next assault upon our senses was the thick, oppressive air, a mixture of smoke, asbestos, fiberglass, concrete, and glass particulate. And it was the glass particulate that really hurt to breathe. The smell was the type of smell, an acrid, sharp odor that tells you something seriously wrong. And we found that the paper surgical masks proved to be very inadequate. As we followed the chief, we passed a lone firefighter who appeared dazed and confused and was just wandering the periphery of what was called the red zone. He was covered in damp concrete and dust and carrying a shovel, seemingly carrying the weight of the world as well. I asked him, how is it down there? He paused and he said, how is it? He shook his head, how is it? They're all gone. That's how it is. I continued from my diary. I caught my first glimpse of Ground Zero and felt weak at the knees. The scene was inconceivable. There were fires burning everywhere, and the buildings that remained standing were unstable. I never expected to experience this scene in my lifetime, and certainly not in our country. There was an initial moment of shock, but then a sense of duty, inspired by training, kicked in. My first instinct was to look up. And actually, that's something that we're taught during incidents like these. Thank you. We're taught to look up as part of our job. But when I looked up, I saw that the Twin Towers were gone. The skin of the remaining surrounding buildings were torn and scarred from the forces of the collapses. They formed walls of a canyon that skirted masses of piles of rubble. For dozens of blocks, twisted steel rose and dropped like giant burial mounds. Suddenly, there was the screech of a police whistle, not the short burst that you hear from a traffic cop. A distant voice warned, collapse, collapse, and a dozen workers began running toward us, halting our forward motion. Go, 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 a PAPD officer screamed in my face. I began backing slowly, but apparently I wasn't moving fast enough for the steel worker, who grabbed me by the turnout gear and just simply carried me back. Come on, come on. Didn't you hear the damned whistle? He shouted. Sorry, kids. Everyone retreated to the relative safety of the North Tower of the Millennium Hotel on Church Street. And while we waited for the all-clear signal, I overheard a Marine say, that's the 6th time tonight. This place just ain't safe. I'll never forget the Marine's comments, the sound of the whistles, or the steelworker shouting in my face. We continued to follow the chief, and at each intersection we collected more volunteers. firemen from Long Island, construction workers, students, off-duty emergency personnel. We finally reached what was called Church Sector, the FDNY command post that was once home to Fire Station 10, a station that New York firefighters referred to as 10 and 10. I'm sure you guys are aware of that station. 10 House was a famed stop for fire buffs, firefighters and their families, because it stood just 50 yards from what was the South Tower. Looking north from the firehouse, the debris from the World Trade Center towers was heaped into mountains of rubble at least 5 or 6 stories high. Massive steel girders, blackened and twisted, were sandwiched in with crushed concrete. But there was one sight that touched us all. A 12-story section of the base of the North Tower was still standing. The steel walls towered above us into the night sky, like church spires reaching out to heaven. The entire scene was backlit by dozens of emergency lights, and an eerie glow was cast onto the rescue workers who were working atop the pile. Of course, I'm referring to the steel sections that are here today, what we called the cathedral at Ground Zero, but are officially known as the trees. At the edge of the pile, no one seemed to be in charge, as hundreds of rescuers crawled around on the hot steel beams, and small work teams organized by members of FDNY, perhaps 20 or 30 rescuers, labored with torches, small shovels, and wire cutters, but for the most part, we were all working with our hands. Lining the perimeter stood thousands of civilian support volunteers ready to usher in food, supplies, or medical attention for the workers. Considerable manpower was needed for organizing supplies so that workers like the firefighters could easily find what they needed and then return to what was called the dig. These support volunteers, housewives, preachers, students, had one mission, and that was to provide any assistance that they could to those who were frantically searching the pile. One of the few buildings that remained undamaged in the disaster zone was St. Paul's Chapel. Many called it the church that didn't fall. St. Paul served as a multi-faith respite for rescuers, both physically and spiritually. There were hundreds of clergy, fire department, and police chaplains from across the country. Regardless of faith, they were there, available day or night. What really amazed me was that people who had never met were working side by side as if they had practiced and trained for months. Cars were lifted, hoses and fire trucks moved, and heavy equipment brought in. As I watched the steel workers, they progressed in my mind from being admirable to heroic. At times, the entire operation came to a sudden halt, and that's when rescuers signaled that they had heard sounds from a possible survivor. This time, the find was along Liberty Street, in the area where debris had been falling all evening. It was a dangerous place to work. Word trickled down from atop the pile that a Marine had heard faint tapping near an elevator shaft. There were more taps, then a sudden rush of activity as police emergency service units and FDNY special operations personnel burrowed by hand through the pulverized concrete, hot steel, and loose debris. It wasn't later, not much later, that a Port Authority police officer was uncovered and removed, alive but extremely beaten up. His partner remained trapped deep below as the surviving members of Rescue 5 launched into a fast team operation to free him. There were perhaps several hundred rescuers who formed a human chain, moving the stretcher that carried the police officer from atop the pile to a waiting ambulance on the very edge. We each had a hand on the stretcher. Even if it were only for a moment, we wanted to bear witness to this amazing event. The discovery of the PAPD officers provided all of the rescuers with a great deal of hope. Cheers and applause spread throughout the sector, spurring the rescuers to work harder, exposing themselves to even more danger. but that's what they've been trained to do. But sadly, the rescues of the two Port Authority police officers, Sergeant John McLaughlin and Officer Will Imeno, were the last. No one else was found alive. It's hard to believe, isn't it? One firefighter said to me, shaking his head from side to side. Using phrases like hard to believe was the common greeting at Ground Zero, much like you and I saying hello to one another. Even though the FDNY had suffered such an incredible loss, their strength as a cohesive working team remained rock solid. Although it was often tough to determine who was running the show, once you made it onto the pile, you realized quickly that it was the New York Fire Department who was in charge. Even after 9 years, the numbers still boggle the mind. On September 11th, 2001, Islamic extremists murdered nearly 3,000 Americans and foreigners. Of those, 343 were firefighters, 23 were New York police officers, and 37 were Port Authority police officers, all of whom were lost in their attempt as they tried to save thousands. What's interesting is that many of these first responders knew they would not survive. How do we know? Many wrote notes or sent final phone messages to their loved ones before leaving firehouses to face the flaming destruction. Perhaps the most powerful that I can recall was a message written by a captain on the house's duty board proclaiming his love for his family. And to this day, that message, written by Rescue 1's Captain Terry Hatton, remains on that chalkboard. Best-selling author and former New York firefighter and my boss at Firehouse Magazine, Dennis Smith, wrote, "The impulse of a firefighter or law enforcement officer is not one that is a lonely impulse. It is shared and agreed upon in every department conversation, every shared meal, every training drill, and every company meeting. There is only one reason to wear the uniforms of our departments, and that is to be there when we're needed. For me, there has been no greater calling in my life than emergency work, whether as a firefighter or paramedic. And today, as we remember all of those who perished 9 years ago, we should also remember how dear a price was paid by New York's emergency responders in service to their fellow human beings. You are in our hearts and minds, and we will never forget. And please stand now and applaud so that they can hear you. Please applaud as loud as you can. That's from Coatesville. Have a seat, I'm not done. While we worked at Ground Zero, the trees stood as a constant reminder of why we were working so hard. The fact that a large section of the building remained standing gave rescuers the hope and energy to keep searching the voids and searching for survivors. During night tours, especially, the trees were heavily backlit by the huge movie production lights that had been set up. They shined on the debris and projected long, diffused patterns through the smoke and floating glass particulate onto the pile. And to the person, we agreed that those beams of light represented the nearly 3,000 souls being called back to heaven. By Thursday, September 13th, enough debris had been removed from the cathedral that volunteers could walk up and touch the steel. Operating engineers had erected a small altar which contained photos, their helmets, and fresh flowers. Where they got fresh flowers at Ground Zero, I'll never know. But it became a ritual for many who entered Ground Zero to make that first stop the standing section of the World Trade Center. Some would kneel. Others would simply touch the steel. Others would say a silent prayer and then get to work. But for me, the strangest thing, and I'm by no means a big supporter of supernatural phenomenon, was that many of us felt the energy flowing from the steel into us. And ask many who were there, and you'd find that they'd say that those moments were spiritual and uplifting. At Ground Zero, we refer to the trees as the cathedral, as I said. So if you hear that discussion in coming months, or that description in coming months and years, please understand that it is the trees to which the rescuers are referring. 3 or 4 times each day, there was a non-denominational religious service held at the base of the trees, which at their highest stood perhaps 12 stories near the intersection of West and Liberty Streets. I usually do this as a PowerPoint presentation, and I'd be going like this. Many rescuers developed a profound connection to the cathedral and these trees. Most rescuers no longer regarded the wall as pieces of steel. To them, it became and will always be sacred ground. So, nearly 9 years later, when the steel returned here to Coatesville, I waited until I was alone, and I walked up to one of the 18-wheelers adjacent to the presentation area next to the old house. I recall reaching out and touching the steel, and I immediately felt that energy once again. The faces of my family and friends who were lost flashed through my mind, and I began to tear up. When I looked up, my fellow Ground Zero workers who were there in attendance that day were standing next to me, fingertips reached out. It was a very, very interesting moment for me. At Ground Zero, a few firefighters and friends and I would take our break at about the same time each night. One evening, one member of our entourage mentioned that if a monument were ever to be built at the site, it should include the wall of trees. Well, as we know, there will be nothing at Ground Zero Memorial to actually remind us of the towers except 2 half-size footprints of the buildings. And those who died will be memorialized in plaques placed in a dark underground alley. I'm really saddened by this because such heartless decisions made by the Memorial Committee are very disturbing. It's almost as if the owners feel the need to hide any recollection of the event. So, who are they fooling? For those of us who served at Ground Zero and anyone who is old enough to recall the World Trade Center disaster, these trees will forever be the most recognized icon of that tragic event. Our current Discovery Channel special, to be televised this Sunday evening at 10, opens with an animated graphic segment of the cathedral. And the artwork for the 10th anniversary Discovery Channel also includes the trees. A friend of mine, Andrea Boer, FEMA's still photographer at Ground Zero, mentioned to me that she felt obliged to include the trees in all of her photos. And you can actually go online to FEMA.org, click under the photo gallery, and see her shots. In closing, the key lesson that 9/11 taught us is one that emergency services here in Coatesville learned during the nationally reported arson crisis. And that is that no single group can effectively respond to a large-scale disaster alone. Coordination and teamwork among all agencies and groups is a necessity. The most vital lesson we've learned from 9/11 is to acknowledge that the human spirit is composed of an incredibly deep well, a well full of humanitarian instinct and a shared understanding that can and must guide each and every one of us as we reach out and help one another. I'd like to make this prediction, and that is that once the museum that's planned here for Coatesville becomes a reality and the trees have a permanent home, September 11th, the day of recognition, won't be happening in Lower Manhattan. That important day of recognition for Ground Zero responders and many, many people will be here in Coatesville. It's here that the true relics of 9/11 can be touched, and it's here where we'll be able to sit, recall, and remember those who perished. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Angeli, for that wonderful speech, your own personal experiences, and such graphic descriptions of what actually occurred. I think we're ready for another bell ringing at 9:43 as we commemorate Flight 77 that crashed at that time into the Pentagon. Thank you. Now for our next musical selection, we're honored to have with us Dr. C. Burnett Barnes, who is a PhD in music, professor at Cheney, and I'm happy to say has been here before for some of our Greystone Society concerts. Dr. Barnes? C. Burnett? Good to see you. You want to go from there? That would be the best way. Whenever you're ready. Well, where we
go. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. Over my head, I see glory in the air. Over my head, I see glory in the air. there must be a God, there must be a God. Somewhere. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows my sorrow. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Glory, hallelujah. Sometimes I'm up, sometimes I'm down. Oh, yes, Lord. Sometimes I'm almost to the ground. Oh, yes, Lord. If you get there before I do, oh, yes, Lord, tell all my friends I'm coming too. Oh, yes, Lord. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows my sorrow. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Glory, hallelujah. He's got the whole world in his hand. 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 He's got you and me, brother, in his hand.
Thank you, Dr. Barnes, for that beautiful presentation. As I mentioned earlier, I got acquainted with her some time ago when she gave some of our concerts when we were doing them at Greystone. And I remember with great pleasure she had me at Cheney a couple of years ago to a wonderful concert of some of her students there. So, Dr. Barnes, thank you again. Yeah. We're about ready for another bell ringing, I think, in a few minutes. At 9:59, we will commemorate sadly, the collapse of the South Tower. While we're waiting, Mr. Angeli mentioned something that a number of people have talked about, is why didn't they leave standing that group of trees on the one corner? Scott pulled up the New York Times article online this week when they brought one of the trees back to Ground Zero. And it did indicate exactly what he said, that a great many people thought that they should have been left standing, and however, whatever the decisions were, they were taken down. During the course of the trips that Scott and I had to the airport, I know the security person that we talked to, a wonderful guy, Lieutenant Ryan, who was extremely helpful to us in the whole business over there, said that when they decided to take them down, they thought they could just pull them down. And they attached chains, and it didn't happen at all. They were just so heavily embedded. So they actually had to put people on cranes with torches to cut them to get them down. Another statistic that he shared with us was that these buildings, of course, had concrete over the steel webbing of the floors. And those buildings were an acre, roughly, the footprint, 110 stories high. So two buildings, the statistic was that 220 acres of concrete collapsed and were pulverized that morning. One of the many, many things we heard during our visits over there. We are about, I believe, to another bell in a moment here. A couple of minutes yet. And while we're waiting, let me add another message of thanks to all the Ground Zero responders and local fire police who are in attendance here today. Also, the readings from the Brandywine YMCA Youth and Government Club, the Greater Coatesville Girl Scouts, and certainly we are so thrilled that this is a community event and so many people have come forward today for it. So in a couple of minutes, another bell ringing. Mr. Angeli also mentioned St. Paul's Church, which miraculously survived. It's a wonderful old church, I believe the oldest church in Manhattan. And so close to it, when great enormous buildings collapsed, and the number 7 that burned, and yet this building survived, sheer the hand of God. I remember being down there about a year after it happened. In fact, in September 2002, the church has a small cemetery behind it with steel railings, antique iron railings, and all of which were covered with mementos that people had left, flags, souvenirs, tourists who had come down there and felt obliged to somehow share in the tragedy of New York by leaving a memento behind. Again, one of the many gripping things that you see there. So we're just waiting a moment here. I understand a similar ceremony is being held today at Somerset County to commemorate the plane that crashed there. The governor in attendance with Mrs. Obama and Mrs. Bush. So that should have been an interesting ceremony, too. I personally regret that I never went to that restaurant on top of the buildings. I saw them many times, but never dreaming that I wouldn't have the opportunity someday to go to the top.
The time is now 9:59. The South Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. Please observe a moment of silence.
Thank you. Now, another musical selection by the Lukens Band. That, I believe, was Samuel Barber's Adagio for Strings as arranged for a concert band. Particularly anxious to have had that played today because Chester County is celebrating this year the 100th anniversary of the birth of Samuel Barber, who, of course, came from Westchester. The Chester County Historical Society's got quite an exhibit on him, and he is probably, I'd say without doubt, Chester County's most celebrated composer. And the Adagio for Strings, one of his most famous compositions, and often played at memorial services. So thank you, gentlemen, for that, and lady, for that orchestral group. Our next bell ringing is not for 10 minutes. 10:10, we commemorate the Somerset County crash, when the flight 93 United Airlines crashed. So, would you like to play something else or do that again for a minute or two? We're running very much on schedule. In fact, a little ahead. Thank you for that additional great music. While we have a few minutes before the next bell ringing, we would like to introduce Mr. James Thompson from the Fire Department of New York, who I understand is here. Mr. Thompson, would you come up, please?
I'm not really prepared for this. It's a very hard day for me. I lost 68 good friends that day. I was one of the first responding companies to the trade center. My station was 12 blocks from it. So you can imagine driving 12 blocks, siren lights, how long it takes you to get there. It's a day that I'll never forget. We rescued a bunch of people. I'm not going to really go into details because I really don't feel that anybody really needs to hear what I saw that day and the conditions of some of the victims and stuff. The biggest thing is I just hope that nobody never forgets this day. It seems like more and more people are like, excuse the expression, like blowing it off, as opposed to a remembrance of what happened on that tragic day, how we were attacked, all the people that lost their lives that day, all the people that have lost their lives since that day. One article that I read a couple weeks ago that really got me was, in 1 week, 7 New York City firefighters had succumbed to cancer, had died in 1 week, that were there that day. I hope nobody ever forgets that day, and keep everything in their mind. That's it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
In just a few moments, we'll have another bell ringing, this time Flight 93, which was the one that crashed in the countryside at Somerset County, Coatesville. And we will have that in just a moment. I think at 10:10. So again, give us a couple times here. When we first planned this program, we wondered if we'd have enough time between the bell ringings, but actually it's been working quite well, and we've had everything going. So if you'll just be patient for a moment while we have another one. I think one of the best news shots when we brought the trees back was the firemen who did exactly what they did now with the two ladder trucks and the flag suspended between them. Certainly very dramatic and very beautiful for us.
The time is now 10:10. The 40 passengers and crew on board United Airlines Flight 93 launch a counterattack against the hijackers on their plane. The plane crashes in an empty field in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. Please observe a moment of silence.
Thank you. Our next musical selection, again, will be the choir. And we look forward to more beautiful music.
Day to walk again, slow through a forest deep. Oh, for a time to talk again before I go to sleep. Oh, for the warmth of summer sun, the chill of winter's eve, and oh, for a chance to sing my song once more before I leave. Oh, for the scent of autumn air, brisk and clean and cold. Oh, for the chance to travel where the seas are blue and bold. Oh, for the kiss I never kissed, and oh, for a chance to sing my song once more while yet I missed. Cry of bird and wail of wind, word unspoken, sin unseen, a night to dance, a hill to climb, the chance to sing while there is time. Oh, for the taste of meat and ale to linger on my tongue. Oh, for the sight of hill and dale and faces that are young. Oh, for the hand of one I love, the time to bloom and grow, and oh, for a chance to sing my song once more before I go.
Thank you so much. And I think a good round of applause. Mrs. Lewis, who directed this, and we're thrilled to have these students here. As I said earlier, they are the future of our community. Now it's my pleasure to introduce someone we all know very well, our representative in Harrisburg, the Honorable Tim Hennessy. Tim, please.
Thank you, Gene. Thank you, Scott. I'm pleased and honored to join all of you here on a very magnificent morning in Coatesville, which is sort of oddly reminiscent of that morning 9 years ago. And we all remember when that day was shattered by the horror and the terror of the attacks in New York City, and the plane crash in Shanksville, and the plane crash into the Pentagon. We all remember how we felt that day as those events unfolded time and time and time again on television. So while today we remember the loss of innocent life, we also honor the courage, the valor. We honor the selflessness and the love of their fellow human beings, of the men and women in uniform who responded that day with such dignity, with such respect, and with such responsibility. And while we remember all of those things, we also celebrate the American resilience that we all witnessed that day and in the years that have unfolded since. We celebrate the surge of patriotism and the rebirth of the American spirit, which was rekindled by that terror on that day. We celebrate as well the valor of our emergency responders, which was so evident on September 11th, 2001, but which is repeated each and every day across America. We saw it yesterday in Millview, on that hill, when our firefighters and police and emergency responders went there to fight an unexpected fire. 2 were seriously injured. Thankfully, no one was killed. There was no loss of life at Millview. But they were injured fighting to save lives and to fight for the property and protect the property of their fellow man. We saw it a few years ago on Fleetwood Street and in the series of arsons that we had, as time and again our firefighters and our police and our emergency responders came out in Fleetwood Street. That was a bitterly cold night, as you recall. We see it every day in America. It's part of the American spirit, and it's something we really thank God that we have and we can rekindle each and every day when needed. Americans respond. They spring into action and do what's necessary to preserve and protect and defend, whether it's the Constitution, whether it's not the property of our fellow individual citizens, or whether it's those citizens' lives themselves. The terrorists never counted on that kind of resurgence of the American spirit. I guess they thought they had a momentary victory on September 11th, 2001, but what they've seen and witnessed in the years that have followed, it seems to me, have turned the tables on them tremendously. So today, while we mourn the loss of life and the tremendous destruction, the needless destruction that occurred that day, that was visited upon our shores, we commit ourselves to carry on the dream, which is America. A small band of terrorists didn't speak for the people of the world when they attacked America. The people of America vote with their feet. You can see it every night on the nightly news. People want to come to America because it offers the very best and brightest hope for the future of mankind. They're trying to come here each and every day to partake in the beauty and the hope and the resurgence which is America. So keep that in mind and keep things in perspective as we deal with our problems and we mourn the loss of life and the tragedy of September 11th, 2001. You can hold your heads high as you look upon our flag and thank God we live here in the United States of America, where despite whatever shortcomings we have, we are still the best hope for mankind. Ronald Reagan 30 years ago had it right when he called America the shining city on the hill. People want to come here. People want to live here. People want to be part of what we've established in the greatest nation in the history of mankind. So let me take a moment to thank the organizers, Gene, Scott Huston, the Huston family, all the Lucan Steel Worker family, for giving us the steel tree monuments that we have as a remembrance of 9/11. Let me thank also the choruses, the high school chorus who was here, who sang so beautifully. What happened? I'm sorry. Who sang so beautifully just a moment ago. I got a chance to thank the Girl Scouts as well for being here. The Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts the choruses, the high school kids, the Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts here, they're the leaders of tomorrow. I know they're going to learn from the lessons of 9/11 and from today's history lesson from Mr. Angeli, and they're going to lead America to an even higher level of greatness in the future. So we thank them. We thank all of you for being here, and thank God we live in the United States of America. God bless America. God bless you all. Thank you.
We're very grateful, Tim, for your message. And we have a few minutes yet before the final bell ringing. And I think a message that has come through every speaker is while acknowledging the sadness of the event, is the hope, the future of the country, the resilience. I had a little example of this, a personal thing. A few weeks ago, I was spending a day at my alma mater, Villanova, and attended Mass in a chapel which had a stained glass window, which the university put together, depicting the towers in stained glass, and beneath the pictures of the towers, the names of all the Villanovans who were lost. And I was there at Mass, and it just was marvelous. The sun came through that window, and it reminded you of the sadness, but at the same time gave you a spirit of hope. The final plane crashed at 10:28. We have about 5 minutes. I think Scott wants to make some closing remarks. Would you like to do that now, Scott? Please.
Yeah, I'll close while we wait for the final bell ringing. There are a lot of people to thank and to remember. Again, remembering the victims, thanking the first responders. I just want to thank the City of Coatesville, the City Council, Ted Reed, interim City Manager, and the City Council for really helping make this event and providing us the resources to undertake this. I'd also like to thank the Lukens Band and the choir for providing assistance in the singing, and Dr. Barnes is wonderful as well. Carolyn Keene was helping us with the programs, and Sharon Tandrich helping coordinate with ArcelorMittal. I want to definitely thank ArcelorMittal for their help in not only getting the trees down, but also in bringing them out and helping us take care of them. And, we would like to thank all of our speakers today for coming. We would like to thank you all for being here and being part of the community of remembrance today. So please write down your thoughts on the boards. Please connect to the trees in your own personal way. Touch them. Draw the energy that Lou had talked about. Feel them. They're real, and they're here. And as well, just take away from today, a legacy of those who are not around to live. Live each day as your own. Take the opportunities to do the things that you want to do. And as well, bond in the brotherhood of man. Look out for each other and try and come together and remember the spirit of 9/11 and the coming together. Our park will be open. The trees will be here for a few more hours and all day. And we will have the houses open. But again, I wanted to thank you very much for coming out and for everyone participating today. Sam Red-Civiliak, another helper as well. So again, thank you very much for coming and being here. And please thank a firefighter on your way out. Thank you very much.
Our final bell ringing is scheduled for 10:28, so we're very close to that, which will commemorate the collapse of the North Tower. So if you will be patient for just a few moments. And enjoy the sunshine. Incidentally, the last bell will commemorate the collapse of the North Tower, and you should know that all the trees that we returned from New York did come from the North Tower. We understood that only one tree was saved from the South Tower, and we did not get that one. It either went to New York or to the Navy SEALs, who got one of the trees for their headquarters in Virginia Beach.
The time is now 10:28. The North Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. A rescue and recovery effort begins immediately. Please observe a moment of silence.
Thank you. Now, as we close, the Girl Scouts will now perform the flag ceremony, removing the flags.
Will you all please stand for the retrieval of the flag? Color Guard, attention. Color Guard, approach. Color Guard, honor your colors. Color Guard, retrieve the colors. Color Guard, dismissed.
Conclude the program, let's have a round of applause for these wonderful people who did the ceremony. That does conclude our program. As Scott indicated, our historic buildings are open for visitation. And again, we're grateful that you all came out this morning. Thank you.